Thank you. Good morning. I have a short PowerPoint to share with you. It is the same PowerPoint that we'll be sharing with your employees throughout the week. We have 5 team members that will be in different parts of the county, moving from group to group. I believe there's 71 groups total. So most days there's anywhere from 10 to 15 groups at different locations and some at repeat locations that we'll be having throughout the week. This PowerPoint, as I mentioned, is the same that we'll be sharing with your employees in most of our engagements, and we do a lot of compensation classification work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. We start off by meeting with senior management and talking about what we'll be sharing with your employees. One of the reasons for that is we want you to be knowledgeable. You'll be participating in the process. You'll be completing a job assessment tool, which is a survey about your job that I'll talk about in more detail. But probably just as importantly, you'll have employees that attend the sessions, and when they finish with the session, they'll forget or they won't think of the question they want to ask us when they're there, and they'll come back to work and ask you. And so we want you to be as knowledgeable as possible about the process, the tools, what we're asking them to do, especially in these first 30 days that they'll be involved with. Because the first 30 days are critical because that's the period of time in which employees are telling us about what they do and about their job. We're firm believers, although we do a lot of compensation classification work throughout the country, we're firm believers that the only true expert on a job is the person that does the job every day. And so our process is built around every employee that's included in the study filling out a questionnaire or a survey about their job and telling us in detail what they do on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, answering a series of standardized questions, and providing feedback on what they think makes their job unique. Our process also includes supervisor review. And so after employees have the chance to fill out their survey, and again, I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in the presentation, the supervisors will review the responses given by employees. Supervisors can't change the answers. So throughout this week, we'll be reassuring employees. That'll be a question we'll ask in the first 10 to 15 minutes of every presentation. Can an employee's answer be changed by the supervisor? And the answer is no. What the supervisor will have the ability to do is look at what the employee told us, and they'll be able to tell us, I agree or disagree. And if they agree, that's a good thing. We move forward with that information. If they disagree, the employee and the supervisor will be contacted for further information. And so a key part of the presentation we'll be giving to your employees over the next several days will be to show them that survey, tell them what we're looking for, what type of information we're looking for, how we use that information, what we don't use that information for, because that's usually a question also, but also explaining to them how the supervisors will have the ability to review and what information they can provide throughout that process. If we take a look at who we are, who is Evergreen Solutions, and Evergreen Solutions does just about 50% of the compensation classification work in the state of Florida over the last 20 years. Evergreen has worked in 45 states. In the last 5 years, we've completed 350 studies of this type, compensation classification studies, and they have varied in size. Probably the smallest one we've completed was in the state of Mississippi for 15 people, which was a number of years ago. The largest being about 125,000 people. But the size of the organization we work with most often is a city or county, and most of those vary in size between about 500 employees and about 5,000 employees. So that's the group that we work with most often throughout the country. A lot of our footprint is present within the Southeast. So we work a lot south of Tennessee, south of Virginia, out toward Texas. And as I mentioned, we do quite a bit of work in Florida. And we've worked with quite a bit of your county peers that we'll be looking at as we go through the study. We do other types of HR work as well. But compensation classification makes up about 75% of what we do in all the work that we do throughout the year. We work with local governments. We do work with school districts also, institutions of higher education, a fair number of colleges and community colleges within the state of Florida and around the country we work with. We do work with the state agencies here in Florida and other states, and some quasi-governmental organizations. And some of those would include your Association of Counties, which you're a member. We have done their HR work for about 15 years, the League of Cities, the court clerks, a variety of the other constitutional officers associations, including the Sheriff's Association, are clients of ours as well. What does a compensation classification study include? So what are we really here to do? Compensation classification study has 2 key components that we're concerned about. The first component is internal equity. And that's where we come in to take a look at if I perform the same job as someone else, even if I don't have the same title or work in the same department, or for that matter, even work in the same geographic location within the county, am I paid approximately the same? It's not a comparison necessarily of dollar for dollar. If If someone makes $15.01 in one place, do I have to make $15.01 in another? But it looks at the earning capability of those individuals. Do they have the same path that they can follow over the course of their career from an earning standpoint? The second piece is external equity, and that's the component that many times employees will have a lot more questions for us about. And that's the element of the study where we look at if you left the county and you went to work for another organization, whether public or private, would you make the same amount of money? Would you make more money? Would you make less money based on your experience? And so both elements make up the compensation classification study. One is inward looking, where we're taking a look at what I would make versus my peers here at the county. And the other is outward looking. If I left the county and went to work somewhere else, how would I fare in regards to compensation? Based on collecting both of those pieces of information, we'll come back and make a series of recommendations. We're also firm believers that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So if we find that you're doing something right and what you're doing is working and it's best practice, we're not going to change it for the sake of change. But if we find what you're doing could be improved, we'll come back with a series of recommendations that would potentially impact, if adopted, what you do in the future related to compensation classification. What does it not include? And usually at this point, employees will ask us a question, or there'll be some type of concern about, well, what about you coming in and telling us if we have enough people? And I'm working a lot more than 40 hours a week is a common comment that we receive. Or will I be compensated for the extra time I'm working when I'm an exempt employee or a salaried employee? And the study does not include a staffing component. So we won't be able to come back and tell employees in one work unit or business unit, you have too many people or you have too few people, nor will we be coming back and making recommendations on a reduction in force or an increasing in force. And so that's usually a common question that comes up in a study like this one. Are those studies done sometimes concurrently with compensation classification work? Could one of your employees have worked for an organization that did both at the same time? Absolutely. Sometimes they are done together. But we'll reassure your employees that if that was the case, we'd have to ask a different set of questions even than what we're asking here to do the compensation classification work. The other thing is if there's any type of guarantee. And employees will typically ask us during these sessions, am I guaranteed a raise based on the compensation classification study? And the answer to that is, I've been doing this more than 20 years. Nobody does a study like this with a guarantee. And so no employee is guaranteed anything when we go through this process. And what we'll share with them is some organizations we find are ahead. Some organizations are behind, but most we find are mixed, somewhere in the middle, where some jobs are doing well, some jobs are behind the market. Even in those situations, there's no guarantee the county or one of the organizations included in the study would have the money, or the resources, or the political support to make that change. Our job is to come back and present the facts, or present the information that we're able to collect and the facts as we see them. And then really it's the policymakers that make the decisions about how to use that information or implement that information. What they can expect is it will be comprehensive. It will take a look at every job. Every individual that fills out a JIT, their job will be reviewed as part of that JIT process. It does include that if we're not sure that the information is correct or we have all the information, we'll contact that person, give them a multiple opportunity to participate in the process, and make sure that we have the right information. We definitely, another thing that we believe, or another one of our principles is we believe garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have the right information, we're not going to give you the right information back. And so we want to make sure we're giving everyone the opportunity to participate, that we're collecting the right information, and we're validating that information. The second piece is there's a lot of communication in the beginning of a project like this one. Why? Because we're here on site, we're meeting with employees. Beginning next week, they'll be filling out that survey over the next several weeks. Supervisors will be filling out or responding to the surveys after that. There's a lot of action that occurs in the first 30 days. And then after that, we do quite a bit of work back in Tallahassee, where we're based. And that's where we're analyzing everything that employees gave us. And then usually there's some more communication that goes on, as I mentioned before, where we're reaching out to employees where there was a disagreement between the supervisor and the employee. But then after that period of time, again, we're working more with your peers. So we're concentrating more outside of Pinellas County. Because there's those opportunities to interact, and quite a bit of activity where we're interacting, and then those periods of time where there's less interaction, we'll be providing the communication update to your team, your compensation classification team, and HR. And they'll be able to push that out to employees to tell them, this is where we're at, this is what they're doing next, because there's not as much activity in that period where we're analyzing the information, at least on site, as much activity, or where we're collecting data from your peers. And I'll talk more about those components of the process in a few moments. As I mentioned, our process is very employee-driven. And so one thing that we'll be doing today is really encouraging employees to take the opportunity while we're here this week, starting next week with the survey, as we go through the process to provide as much information as they can. The first thing is we'll commend them for attending an orientation session, and that's really what you're attending now. I'm going through the exact same materials that the orientation sessions on your schedule include. And you're hearing exactly the same information. And whether a person attends today, there was 2 that started at 8 a.m. this morning, they'll be hearing the same thing we're talking about now, or if they attend on that last session, which I believe is 4 to 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon, it'll be the same materials, the same PowerPoint, the same instructions. So we'll commend them for participating in the orientation process and learning about what we're doing. In addition, this session is being videotaped, and there'll be one other session videotaped that they'll have the ability to go online. So if an employee comes to you and says, I really couldn't work it in my schedule, I was on vacation, my children were sick, whatever the case might be, they'll have the opportunity to view the sessions from today, the 2 sessions that will be available on the intranet, I believe, after they're recorded this week. Also, employees will have the opportunity to participate this week in a focus group. And so the focus groups are set up on the calendar and schedule as well. I believe they can sign up through the automated system to participate in those. And the focus groups will ask 10 questions. And the questions will start off by asking employees to tell us about why they came to work for the county, why they remain with the county. It'll go into compensation and classification concerns they might have. It'll talk to them a little bit about benefits. Do they feel those are competitive? It'll ask them if they're a high performer, how they're recognized. It'll also ask some questions about what they feel like could be improved as it relates to compensation classification within the county. And each of those sessions will have the same questions. So if your employees ask you, hey, I signed up for the one on Tuesday, I'm going to have to go on Wednesday instead, am I missing my opportunity to give feedback? The answer is no. All of those sessions will ask the same questions as well. And so if they can't attend the one they've signed up for, they need to sign up for a different one, we'll be asking the same questions in each of those groups. Conversely, sometimes employees want to attend multiple sessions because they feel like, well, it's a different question set for one session versus another. And they can. We wouldn't tell them you've already attended, you cannot attend again, but the questions would be exactly the same in each of those focus group sessions over the course of this week. We're asking all employees included in the study to fill out a JIT. So some employees might have been through this process before, especially at other jurisdictions, where some organizations only collect a sample of employees, meaning there's only a finite number of your total employee count that participate in the JIT process or in that survey process. Our process is built on every employee has the opportunity to fill it out and participate. There is an online version, and I'll show you that in a few moments and walk you through that. In addition, each of the orientation sessions this week will be providing some helpful hints, showing them what the tool looks like and how to access the tool. The supervisor review, if you're a supervisor and you have at least one direct report, you'll be prompted by the automated system to review what the employees gave to us. And again, you can't change their answers, you can't override anything that they've provided, but you'll have the opportunity to agree or disagree. There's also the management issues tool. Again, if you supervise at least one person, so you're the supervisor of record of at least one employee, you'll have the opportunity to identify what you feel like are some of the challenges from a compensation classification standpoint. You don't have to. This is optional. This is up to you. In many organizations we work with, people will fill out 1 or 2. In the large departments, they might fill out 30. There's no limit on how many or how few that you can fill out. I'll show you an example of those as well. They're structured so you can identify, I've got a concern with this classification. I'm having a hard time recruiting and retaining this group of people or this job. Or every time we go out to market to look for someone that we need to have these skills, no one that applies has those skills. And we're stuck with trying to train them and bring them up to speed. And so that's what the management issue tools are targeted at. Then the last piece is some of you will be selected, some of the senior managers will be selected for interviews. That's a process typically after, we'll do a few of those interviews this week, but typically that's a process after we review the JITs. There'll be some follow-up we want to do, some drilling down in some of the areas that we want to make sure we understand how you're structured, how you've chosen to distribute the work among those employees, or if there's any systematic questions as it relates to the JITs. So if you've got a whole department that we have JIT questions on, many times we'll take you up on coming back, setting up a focus group or setting up a group interview, having senior management attend any employees and talk about, okay, how is the work divided within this department? Again, all part of that effort to make sure we have the right information before we move the process forward. Let's talk a little bit about the JIT. Really the remainder of the presentation relates to the JIT. So from an operational standpoint, after this week is complete, so on Friday, when we finish up the last orientation sessions and the last focus groups, our automated system should be loaded with all the necessary information to launch the survey to your employees. And I'll go through some of the screenshots in the next several slides, but to tell you a little bit about what we use the JIT for. And employees will typically ask us in some of the orientations, do I have to fill it out? Is it required? Is this being ordered by my supervisor to be completed? What we tell them is, we'd much rather have them complete the JIT than your supervisor or one of us complete the JIT. Many times they'll ask, well, how does Evergreen complete the JIT for me? That would mean we would take your current job description, and from your current job description, complete the JIT on your behalf. And so many times when we say that, employees start shaking their heads, and they say, no, I think I'll complete my own JIT, and not have it approached that way. The other approach that we could adopt is have the supervisor fill it out for them. But again, our preference, and what makes our system work, is to have that employee participation, where employees tell us about what they do through the JIT form. The JIT will help us first understand how work is organized. So married with the org chart, it helps us really understand how you divided duties within the county, and who does what, and how those duties are divided by level within the same portion of the organization. It'll also help us assess, before we go to the market, if you're paying fairly and competitively internally. So remember, those two components we're looking at, the internal equity and the external equity. It'll help us answer that first question about internal equity. Are you really being fair to people doing roughly the same work here within the organization currently? And if not, that'll identify some things we're going to follow up on as we go through the process. It'll also help us recommend the appropriate pay levels and ranges. So that's the external piece. Where should you be versus your market peers? It'll prompt us to ask the question about, where do you want to be? And then it'll help us test, based on the skills that I have here and the things that I practice in my duties and responsibilities, what are those worth outside of the marketplace? And then the last piece is, if we do design something completely new, which, as I mentioned before, that's not something we go into a study assuming we will, but if something new is recommended, the JIT is critical for us to ensure that it's fair and equitable. So without that information from employees, we really can't do the testing of the different options that we present to the county moving forward. One thing that is a little bit different about Evergreen than maybe some of the companies you've worked with before, we're firm believers too that when we reach that end of the journey, that we present several different options that you're able to look at. And what we found is, with elected officials, also with senior managers, they like to be able to see, what are the options that I have? So if I can't do everything in 1 year, what would it look like if I attacked this over 3 years? Or what would it look like if I started with one component of the county first and moved to another? So we'll develop several different scenarios, and it's critical within those scenarios we have that JIT information, so we can test the validity of each of those scenarios. How does the JIT work? It is web-enabled. Every employee will receive a unique token or identifier. I can tell you, more than likely, employees are going to come to you at some point in this process, and they're definitely going to come to HR and say, I lost my token, I need my token again. I can tell you there is not a single person in this county that will have those tokens, besides the employee having their own tokens. So we're not asking HR to assist with helping people that lose their token. They'll need to come to us. We're not giving the department directors the tokens or a master list of the tokens. We're not giving the immediate supervisors copies of that. And why we don't is, over the years in doing this, employees have told us we really want to have a sense that we're the only one that can get in and out of our own survey. And so we've set it up in a manner in which we keep a copy of that, and one team member on our side will have a copy of that, and the employee receives it electronically, but there's not anyone that works for the county that has those tokens. So if an employee loses their token, they're going to need to contact Evergreen. And there'll be the contact information, the phone number, the email, who they need to direct that to, all on the website that they'll be given access to, where they can have another copy of that token if they need. They're not in trouble if they lose the token. We're used to folks misplacing the email that the token comes through on. That's okay, but you need to tell them to contact us if they don't have that information. It can be done from any computer that has internet access. We'll be encouraging employees to do it during work time. County's not paying overtime for people to do the survey at night or on the weekend or some other time, so we'll be encouraging your employees to complete it during work hours. If they don't have access to a computer, which most jobs today, most work sites have at least one computer that people have access to, we do have a Word-based copy and we do have a paper copy that we'll be able to work with and distribute if that would be necessary. As it mentions here, managers will not have that unique ID number or that token number. The JITs will start on Monday. So the survey will start going out, the emails will start going out. Typically we launch those overnight. And so when folks come in on Monday, they start populating their inbox and they're able to have access to that. If an employee doesn't receive that, and what we find is depending on how the spam filter is set for the county, we usually are able to accommodate that through IT. And so we're able to work with IT. But if the spam filter is set or any type of antivirus is set differently at the individual work site or on the individual computer, sometimes things go in junk mail. And so one of the first things we'll be asking an employee if they indicate they haven't received their email is check in your junk mail first and make sure it didn't go in there, and then we can always resend it if that be the case. They'll have roughly 3 weeks. We looked at having a 2-week window. We decided to increase it to 3 because the holiday's present there. And we know that people may take extra time off because the holiday falls, I believe, on a Tuesday this year. And so if I want to take off the beginning of the week or the end of the week before, we wanted to provide folks extra time. As we go along, so beginning on the 26th forward, we'll be collecting response information. Now by that, we're not collecting that necessarily by person's name. We're not going to be reporting back to HR, Sally's filled it out and Tom has not. But we'll be able to see this number of people have gone in and actually opened it up. This number of people have gone in and started to fill things out. This number of people are complete. And we'll be able to give that feedback. And so if one department or one area is slightly behind or they seem to be having trouble, we're monitoring that in a real-time fashion. And we'll be able to communicate with you, hey, not a lot of your employees seem to be participating. Is there something we can do to help facilitate that? Or did everyone receive their emails? Or conversely, what we find is, or maybe not conversely, in addition, we find that a whole lot of the go-getters will fill it out on the 26th and 27th. So there'll be that big rush of people, I want to get it done. And they'll type in their information and they'll close out their survey. And then there's a lull that goes in between. And then at the end, there's a mad rush where everybody that didn't do it's rushing to complete it. We'll send some updates over that 3-week period, encouraging people not to wait to the last minute, but we know people do that. And so we'll be monitoring closely, are we getting that done? Are we getting in what we expect to find by that point in the process? Supervisors will have 1 week for their review. So after the 14th, July 14th, supervisors will be prompted to go in and do their review. That's at the supervisor of record level, meaning the supervisor that would do the performance review or would approve the timesheet or would be involved in the day-to-day management of the individual. And so that will be available to them through that JIT website also, where they can go in and do their review. JIT has 5 sections. I won't spend time reading out each of the sections, but I will go through each of those because we have some examples of each of those to share with you. It starts off very general. So section 1 is really general information about the employee, how much experience they need to have to do the job, the level of education. Section 2 is probably the most important. That's where they list the tasks that they perform or their responsibilities. Then section 3, they rate themselves on 5 factors. And 4 and 5, they're giving us feedback as it relates to the equipment, the tools they use, or any type of accommodation they would need from a physical ability standpoint. This is what it looks like after they click on the link. So after they receive their email, if they click on their link, it takes everyone here. Their unique ID will be they'll put in, and then it will ask them to confirm their last name. So all this does is simply make sure the right person is sitting there with the ID and the last name. This will be the page it takes them to after they log in. And on this page, they will click on JIT, and all of you will click on JIT first because even the department directors and senior executives are included in the study. So that'll be the first place you go to fill out your survey. And then when your employees have completed their surveys and you're ready to review theirs, that second button will take you to the review and where you can review their answers. The JIT, as I mentioned, makes up those 5 sections. Here are the 5 sections. First one's the basic information, and it literally asks employees to tell us in their own words what is their job all about. So that's the first question. It also asks them to give us an idea of the type of work that they perform. So based on those definitions, they'll read the definitions and indicate the type of work. We ask them the level of education and experience that they feel like they need to do the job. So we're not asking them how much they have, or where they went to school, or how many years they've been with the county. We're asking them to do the job that you have today, Basically, if someone new came in to do your job, how much would they need to have to be successful at that job? We also ask them about any certifications, any other type of professional designation they would need, those that should be required or those that should be preferred. And we tell them, even if you don't have these, what do you feel like would be useful for the county in the future? Then this is the beginning of section 2, and there's only 4 boxes here for the sake of the size of what we're presenting. There's 15 boxes on the actual form that they can fill out, and they're asked to put in their task, the percentage of time that they're engaged in that task, and we ask them to pick the most important. Common question that comes up when they pick priorities or the most important is, what if I don't have the same priorities as someone that sits right beside me? That's okay. Or what if I don't highlight the same tasks as someone that sits right beside me? That's okay too. The right answer is, what do you really do on a regular basis? And so that's what we're asking them for. With the percentage of time, another common question is, I work so hard and I'm here so many hours that I need 200%. 100% is not going to be enough. And what we tell them is, this is an assessing effort. It's assessing how you divide the time that you spend. So think of it as one big pie. And maybe the pie is bigger, maybe the pie is smaller. So maybe this is the 40-hour pie and maybe this is the 50-hour pie. But what we're really concerned about is how the pie is divided, not how big the pie is. And so we want to know, what is 20% of the pie? What's 50% of the pie? What's 30% of the pie? So we tell them with the percentages, it does need to equal 100. We tell them it doesn't have to be in fractions or decimals. They don't have to figure out, this is 46.7% of my time. We tell them round numbers are fine. That's all we're looking for. But we are looking for that number, or all those numbers, to add up to 100%. Then we ask them the 5 questions and the job factors. Now, this is not taken from the automated system because the font's very, very small when we project that many questions or that many components of the leadership question. So this is out of the actual paper version that we pasted in here, but the questions are exactly the same and would look similar on your screen. Here we ask them to read each of the statements, starting with the least complex at the top and going to the most complex at the bottom, and pick the one that's most relevant to their job. We're going to tell your employees this entire week, please read all the answers before you make a selection. It's very important that they read each and every one before they make a choice. What we find is, because they are structured from least complex to most, an employee will read down and sometimes they'll come to the first one that sounds right and they'll say, that's me. And they'll click the box and they'll go on to the next question. It's really important that they take a look at what some of the other ones might be, because there may be elements that are more similar to their job that occurs after where they've reached in the form. And so here on leadership, and I won't read all of these nor read all of these on the ones that follow, but to give you an example, leadership here, because I know the font is even small in this version, I follow specific directions provided by my supervisor and receive feedback on what I do. So that's the least amount of leadership that a person would exercise. Where the most, where probably many of you in this room would fall, is I determine strategy as well as long-range goals for the organization. I design processes, allocate resources, and report to elected officials or the public. And what's in between would be different shades of gray, if you will, between that lowest level, which is determining strategy, and that top level, or the top of the form, being I follow directions as directions are given to me. So we're asking employees to read each of those. Then there will be a box, a text box at the bottom, where they can provide to us some examples. Projects they're working on, things they're doing, employees they're helping, strategies they're developing, whatever the case might be is provided at the bottom. That doesn't have to be written in beautiful narrative or prose. We tell employees it doesn't have to even be complete sentences. You can make a list of things that you want us to consider in support of that individual answer that you gave. Same thing with working conditions. Starts off a very safe environment. Thing at the bottom, or the most complex, is I make decisions that can lead to major community or organizational consequences. And so most employees will fall somewhere in between, not at the top or in the bottom, and that's why, again, it's important for them to read each of the examples. With complexity, same thing. It starts off with I perform specific clerical or manual tasks and goes all the way through I develop policies, long-range plans, and allocate funds, where in the middle we have entry-level professional work. Then if you have advanced technical, scientific, legal, or mathematical concepts that you deal with, again, it's important that the employees read each of these, pick the box that is most relevant to their job. With decision making, same thing, where I follow directions at the top, where I make high level or broad reaching decisions at the bottom. Again, most employees will select something between that first and that last. With relationships, first one is I work primarily alone. Most of us in a government setting do not work alone. We interact with someone. Someone is coming to us with questions, citizens are coming to us, our phone is ringing, there's some manner of interaction, so it's relatively rare to work alone, although it's possible, where the highest level here is I interact with senior managers, citizens, and elected officials on a regular basis. And again, like each of these, we're asking them to provide a few examples in the box at the bottom. With equipment and machinery, and this is a very long form, and so what we have is just the top of the form, is we ask them if they use in the first set of questions, and we ask them if they use or repair in the second. And then there's a series of questions of, do I use, repair, or purchase? And then do I use, repair, purchase, or manage those that are involved in using, repairing, or purchasing? And it has a list of things I can be involved in, from small office equipment to copiers to machines that would work on roadway, asphalt machines, all the way through graders, all the way through GIS, advanced automated systems, ERP systems, accounting systems. So it has each of those listed out. And again, we've just taken a small sample to share with you this morning, but we ask all your employees to go through that entire list and look at if there's any equipment or machinery that they work with on a regular basis that they want to designate. There's also an open box at the bottom. And so many times employees will tell us, I'm the only person that knows how to use this piece of software for state reporting. Or I'm the only person that does this federal report through this piece of software. There's a box at the bottom where they can tell us what that software is if they so desire. With physical abilities, this question set's included so we can update your job descriptions for the Americans with Disabilities Act. We'll ask them about what are some of the required physical components that make up their job. We recognize that those vary by jobs. Reasonable accommodation makes things a whole lot easier. One day you may be able to have a bus driver that doesn't have vision. We're not there yet, but with the automated cars and trucks, maybe we'll get there. But what we're looking for here are what are the senses and physical abilities that they really need to have to do their job, that are required for their job. What are some tips? Probably 50% of the employee phone calls we receive in a study like your own is, I didn't click the save button. And so we'll be telling employees throughout this week, in all those sessions, please click the save button. If you get a phone call, go ahead and click the save button. If you get up and go to the bathroom, click the save button. If you have to go up to the counter because someone's at the window, a citizen's at the window asking a question, please click the save button. The reason being is, for security reasons, the software after a certain number of minutes takes the screen away, resets itself. Just like it would if you went into a banking site or you went into something that deals with money or financial, you know after a while it says you've timed out and I've closed you out. Well, our system has a similar feature. It's because over the years employees said I don't want another employee to be able to sit down if I get up from my desk and go to the bathroom and enter something into my form. And so we've set a timeout feature as well, but if the timeout feature happens, it doesn't always save everything that's been typed in before it times out. So definitely click save before you go off and do anything else or move to the next section. If there are questions or concerns, this email and this phone number, and there'll be a name or set of names provided that employees can contact us during basically 7:30 to 5:30 any day with questions that they have. And they'll have some instructions on how to do that and how to reach us. Our goal is to always respond within 4 hours. And so even if there's a backlog where we have a variety of people that are calling in, we'll turn around within that 4-hour window the questions that people have. They can ask us technical as well as substantive questions. So we get questions, I can't see it well on my monitor, I'm doing it on my iPad, what resolution do I need to set, is there a better browser or another? We can answer those questions also. If they're highly, highly technical, then many times we'll contact your IT shop for those questions, but the basic technical questions we can assist them with. The substantive questions would be more, I don't know exactly what I do or how I do this on the form for what I do. So I perform this task or this duty, but where do I make sure I receive credit for that? That's a very common question we receive also. And so those questions are more than welcome. They can contact us by phone or email, and we're happy to respond to those as we go through the process. With a supervisor review, again, supervisors cannot change the answer. I'll show you an example of what that form looks like in a few moments. They can agree or disagree. If they disagree, we need you to provide a comment of why. So we need you to tell us why you disagree. You can't just go down the employee's form and say, I just disagree with everything. You have to tell us what you disagreed with, and then that period begins after employee entry ends. And why we ask you to wait is because employees do have the ability to go in and out of the form multiple times, and we're going to encourage them to do that. We're going to tell them, even if they are speedy, and they can fill out that whole form, and that whole form, if you do a thorough job, takes anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. If I have the luxury of sitting down and finishing the form all at once, we tell even those employees, go back and look at it one more time. Make sure you didn't miss something before you finalize your survey. This is what the job assessment tool management issue tool component looks like. So this is where I can download the tool, I can fill out the information, and then I can sort those that I've put together and provided. And so that is in a consolidated feature within the JIT software as well. So I can do my reviews and I can do my MITs at the same time. The MITs could be submitted during the JIT process, but if you're a supervisor, you also have the ability to go and complete those after you review the employee responses, also during the supervisor review period. Here's what the supervisor review form looks like. Literally, the person says, I work in an office, so we pick something very simple. I'm a technical paraprofessional. I have an associate's degree, or I believe the education necessary would be an associate's degree. I believe 4 years of experience. This person put life as the certification that they have. And so as a supervisor, if I agree with that, I would click agree. And if I could click all day on work in the office, technical paraprofessional, associates, I can't change that. That literally is text on a website. So I can't go in and change that information. So if I disagreed, I'd have to go down to the bottom and put that supervisor required comment. And so in this case, degree required is a master's degree. I agree with the description given. That would prompt, and when you include that example, the person's agreed, but they've said it requires a master's degree, that would result in us contacting you. So we'd call you because you clicked agree, but you gave us a different comment. And so that's why the comments are so important for us to understand what are you saying or what are you not. Again, it doesn't have to be beautifully written prose or a long essay that you provided to us. It's really just so we can understand what were you thinking, what were you not, and so we can contact you for any type of clarification. Again, we go back to the management issue tool. So if we went back to that screen again and we select the management issues tool, here's the two major categories that make it up. The first is classification, the second is compensation. For classification, it can be as simple as I don't think the title's right. We know titles change in government predominantly as it first changes in private industry. So as private industry starts calling something something else, governments typically emulate or copy what that's being called in the marketplace. And why most local governments do that is because you want to make sure you're signaling the market correctly for those you're trying to attract or those you're trying to hire. And so you want to call it something that employees recognize, oh, that's a job I'd be interested in and I should read the ad or I should respond to the ad. And so titles included there, recruitment and retention issues are included there, as well as expanding the job series. So a key part of the study will include assessing your career path. And if you're like most counties, probably you have strong career paths in some parts of the organization and weaker ones in others. And so a key test that we'll be performing in the beginning of the study will be to assess, does everyone have a career path or how well developed are those career paths? As a supervisor, you may feel like that's not something we've done a good job at. And so as part of that MIT, you could include that as the third option down under classification and job title issues. In addition, it may be compensation. A person may be in the wrong pay grade. We may have trouble recruiting and retaining because we just don't offer enough when we try to hire. Or it may be other related issues to compensation. And so you can fill out as many MITs as you would like. You can designate individuals on the MIT. You can say Jill Smith is the one most impacted by this, or you can say everyone in this classification. Say everyone in your department, but there's also some boxes, there's also a text box there where you can provide an explanation to explain why you feel like it's relevant to those individuals. So those are the major things that we'll share with employees over the next several days. From a process standpoint, as I mentioned, really these 30 days are very, very labor intensive for your employees because they're filling out the survey, they're attending the sessions this week. It does impact slightly their workload or their workflow because they're trying to do these things while they're doing their normal jobs. And so the first 30 days we'll be collecting this information, collecting that data. Once we have that data, we'll go through a period of time, it's usually about 2 weeks, where we validate that data. So we'll be communicating with HR and with the comp team about this is what folks told us, and these are the individuals we need to follow up with, and we need to schedule sessions or communications with. Sometimes employees will come to individuals like yourselves and say, I must be in trouble because the consultant's coming back to meet with me. And that's not the case. It doesn't mean that the employee did anything wrong or they made a mistake, and it doesn't mean the supervisor did anything wrong. Again, it's just where we want to make sure we have the right information. And so that usually occurs after the supervisor review within about 2 weeks. After that, we usually start the salary survey. So the salary survey will involve us going out to your peers, and at this point we haven't identified the jobs nor the peers. That's something we use the data we're collecting over the next month to help inform our decision about who we should include as your peers and what jobs should be included in the survey. But we'll start working on what should be included over the next month, month and a half, and then launch that process after we complete the collection of the data as it relates to your jobs. In addition, during that period of time where we're waiting on your peers to send back the data, we're analyzing those JITs in quite a bit of detail. And we're looking at what would be the appropriate classification structure. And so that'll be part of the process. And then by the time we're finished with that, we'll have the compensation data come back in, and we'll look at how to marry those two together. How should the compensation classification go together? Employees will ask us, what does this mean for me? Or what could come out of this? And what we'll tell them is our recommendations will include one of several outcomes for every incumbent. It could be no comp change, no class change. It could be a comp change and no class change. It could be a class change and no comp change. Or it could be a change in both, where it changes their classification and changes their compensation. But we'll be reminding them as we go through the process, just because we make that recommendation doesn't mean the county will necessarily implement it. We don't go into these studies ever with any type of guarantee, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Nor do we know what we're going to find. And so I can almost promise you, over the next 5 days, folks are going to ask us, what do we think we're going to find? And whether it be Martina or Kelly or myself or Michael or David, any of the team members that are here this week, they're all going to say the same thing. We don't know, because that's the truth. We're not hiding anything. We haven't met with HR or senior management and they told us you need to find this. So we're usually asked that by most employees. We haven't been instructed to find a specific answer. And we literally won't know what we should recommend until several months into the process. It takes us that long to really know what the recommendations will be. And then what's actually implemented is at the very end of the process. That's when we come back, visit with all of you again as directors, when we visit with your elected officials, when we brief the manager's office. That's the part of the process where usually our recommendations begin to be looked at as what's feasible and not feasible. And so that's toward the end of the journey. So at this point, we wouldn't be able to tell employees. They may ask us, what have we found in other places? That's usually a common question. Or have we worked places where people receive big raises? And what we tell them is absolutely. When you do this long, there's places we've worked that gave big raises. And if they ask, have you worked places where people gave no raises? And we tell them absolutely. You do this long enough, there's places that don't give any raises out of the study. But most fall somewhere in the middle. Most fall in that doing some for some individuals, usually those that are the worst off, and not a lot for those that are in good shape. That's where most of them end up. And so if they ask us about that over the next several days, we're going to be honest with them, that most places don't spend an exorbitant amount of money, and most places don't spend no money whatsoever. Most fall somewhere in the middle in addressing the recommendations or addressing what we find. So why don't I open it up for questions? I appreciate your indulgence this morning. I know it's a lot of material, and usually with the employee groups, they ask us questions throughout. So please, feel free to ask me any questions you have or any suggestions you have. Yes?
The internal equity and the external equity, is that equitable? I mean, do you spend the same amount of time finding out, is it internally equitable, and is it external?
That's a very good question. I'm going to repeat your question since we're on the video. Question is, do we spend the same amount of time roughly on the internal equity component as we do on the external equity component? And from an analysis or part of our process that involves the analysis, the answer is yes. Does every organization implement an approach that's equally balanced between the two? And the answer there is no. So that's a question we'll be asking as we go through the study. Which is more important to the county? And so many urban counties that have a significant number of competitors will leverage more on the external side than the internal side for recruitment reasons. So they'll make the decision that internal is important, but we have to use these resources for external because we have so many competitors within the area, if you're in a major metropolitan area like you are, where others may opt, no, we really want to make sure that everything's right internally first before we go to the outside. And so we do have some large counties we work with that takes that approach instead. But we'll spend the same amount of time on both, but we will ask for feedback in the future on, okay, based on what we know and what it would take to address this, what resources do you have? How do you want to address it? What is the squeakiest wheel that you feel like would receive the oil first? And so that'll be a dialogue we'll have, but we'll work up both to the same extent as we go through the process. Yes.
With regards to the JIT, how do you account for current vacant positions? We've got a manager, director positions, and high-level positions that are vacant. How do we account for that?
Question is, how do we handle vacant positions in completing the JIT, especially a higher level position? We really only have those two options that I mentioned before. We have the option that we can have the supervisor. So if it's a high level position and there is someone here on staff that's at a higher level, they could complete the JIT for that position. So to clarify again, they're not completing it for a person, they're completing it for that vacancy. The other alternative is, and this does occur quite often in organizations as well, will be asked by HR or by that supervisor, take the job description and score it for us. And so we will offer that as an alternative also. It usually divides in most organizations between, and it's usually divided by departments. Some departments will say, no, we'll sit down as a management team and we'll do the JIT for those that are vacant. Where other departments may say, no, we really prefer that HR asks Evergreen to do those for us. And we're comfortable with either approach. So that's how we deal with any of the vacancies, even at a lower level in the organization. Yes, ma'am.
With respect to external equity, if you're losing employees to a field that's highly technical,
Okay.
that are in the private sector, how do you adjust to that?
Question is, if you are losing employees to an area that's highly technical and in the private sector, I believe you mentioned, in those cases, when we come back and recommend the targets to you, we'll recommend a series of public and private targets, and then we'll talk to you about your compensation philosophy and about how you've approached that market in the past. Some of your county peers will not use private data in their estimation, some will. And so we'll talk about pros and cons of including that information. Even if the private data is not included, especially in the technical field, we'll have a pretty good idea of what the market pressure is in that regard. And there's a variety of ways to approach that. One is to adopt a slightly different compensation strategy for those technical positions. So in essence, place them in the solution at a different place than what, all things being equal, other jobs would be placed. The other thing that we see a lot of public organizations utilizing would be a critical class differential. And that's basically something that you can put in place that would be in addition to the base salary that takes into account those wider market gaps, especially those that are impacted by private industry. And so around Florida, what we see with construction coming back, obviously the IT occupations came back earlier at the end of the recession than a lot of other occupations. Engineering now has come back. We see some of the trades booming in different parts of the state now. We see even some planning positions becoming quite competitive. With the recovery of banking, we're seeing some of the accounting, finance, budget positions, especially the higher skill ones, are becoming quite competitive again. And so that would be something that in the salary survey, if we include public and private, we definitely pick up on. If public was more the emphasis and private was less so, we'd still bring those comments forward. This is what your peers are doing above and beyond their regular pay practices to be more competitive, because they are doing that in a variety of occupations right now. So very good question. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of building on that question, when you're comparing to private sector, do you look at total compensation package? I mean, I think there's a perception that, governmental employers provide better benefit packages, but also, private industry, provides performance bonuses. So do you look at that total compensation packages?
That question is, do we look at total compensation when we look at private, especially the variable pay or the performance-based component from private? That's a question we ask you. That is a question most of our public clients, and we only work with public entities, don't opt to have the variable pay component included. So what they're interested in looking at what the base would be and how the base is structured. We have the data to give to provide as it relates to variable pay. Variable pay, though, is usually much more influential as a percentage once you're at the professional level or above, and especially in the executive ranges. And so for many of you, if you worked in the private sector in comparable positions with comparable budget authority, comparable number of direct reports, comparable operations, variable pay could be as much as 40% of your compensation. And so many of our public clients say, there's not going to be any, and I'll pick on the county administrator. County administrators, if they're CEOs of corporations of a similar size, would be compensated in the millions when you count variable pay. Most county administrators would say, there's no reason for you to bring that data back to me because the board's not going to pay me in the millions. However, we have that information and we are able to leverage that information. Rarely do we have that information, though, from a primary source, and I want to clarify that too, related to the questions about private. Private companies have a real disincentive of providing us competitive data, and so many times what we use is secondary data where they send in their information, but there's an intermediary in between us. And so if they send in that information to us and you receive a public records request, we have to turn that over. We would have to give it to HR. HR would have to give it to whoever requested it. They know that. Private companies know that. And so private companies usually participate in a process like this through a third party. And that third party is not bound by that. So we receive that data. We'll know how many people they employ, what their total budget is, what industry they're in, but we won't know their name. And so through that vehicle, they will provide us the variable pay. And so that's something that we'll be talking about. Do you want to include that, and at what level employee would you want to include? So very good question. Yes?
On that same line, is it total compensation to include benefit packages, or is it just salaries?
We do ask, the question is it total compensation from a benefit standpoint and salaries? And the answer to that is yes. So where most of our clients do not desire to have variable pay included in those calculations, most that we work with do want to know what is the impact of benefits. And coming back to the earlier comment about this idea that the public domain provides better benefits, but the private domain provides better salary and lower benefits, we will collect benefits data from your peers from a value standpoint. So we will be able to do an estimate of total compensation. So we'll not only be able to say this is the total compensation in Pinellas County versus Hillsborough County, or Hernando County, or Manatee County, but we'll also be able to say this would be roughly the differential taking into account the private value of those benefits also. And we do see that, where the generosity of private benefits is not as great as what it is in the public domain. Yes, sir.
One area of requested focus is certification pay. Is the management issues tool the tool that we should be using to try to capture that information?
You are exactly right. Question is, one of the areas of interest is certification pay, and would the MIT or the management issues tool be the right vehicle for providing us that information? And you are absolutely right, yes. It did not include the entire form on there, but there is an area where you can provide us information on certification pay, or even the balance between the certifications you feel like the county should pay for and there should be pay in addition, or the county shouldn't pay for and there should be pay in addition. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and that's an open-ended question where you can provide us whatever information you'd like. Yes?
For the internal equity component, are you looking at the data across the entire organization or just within the department?
Question is, for internal equity, we would look at just within the department or across the entire organization, and the answer is both. We would be looking at each level of aggregation. So we would look within the work unit, we would look within the department or the area, and then we'd also look within the county as a whole. So we would be providing feedback on each of those levels of aggregation. Come back to you again. Yes?
The external equity, do we have access to the comparables that you find? So
At the point that we identify what the comparables will be, we'll provide those to HR and the team we're working with. Usually there is some discussion. we haven't reached that point in our dialogue about how would that be distributed or how would that not be distributed. So I guess that'd be a question I'd have to get back to you on. But we do provide that in advance. We do take feedback. And also, I didn't touch on this, 2 of the questions that we'll ask in the focus groups this week will actually be about if you left the county and went to work somewhere else, where would you go? And so we'll be starting literally today asking questions that help us identify. And from a more scientific or numeric standpoint, HR will provide us the turnover reports. And from the turnover reports and exit interviews, if people did reveal where they went, we'll have that information. And in addition, we'll have a pretty good idea of the inflows and outflows of the level of hiring that's gone on among your peers, your government peers. We don't have that data on the private, but on the government peers, we'll have that information on how many they brought in, who they brought in, and that'll give us a pretty good idea of there's only so many people that have those skills. And if you're losing those people and they're gaining them, we need to take a second look at why that would be. So that they would be included in that regard. In addition, and I didn't touch on this, with the survey itself, there may be, given the diversity that a county possesses, unlike a city, there may be a need to have some separate samples for separate groups of employees or separate jobs. And so one thing, and with the question about technical positions, many times we'll work with an organization that says this group of people really has a lot more competition from this group of employers. And we see that on public safety, we see that on IT, we see that in the trades. So we can stratify the survey or divide the survey where it's targeting a little bit more who you're really competing against in one area versus another. And so that's why we wait until after we review the JITs to come back and recommend who we include. We really want to look at the whole picture before we come back. But literally today, we'll be asking employees if they left, where would they go, or if they had a coworker that left, where did they go? And usually we get a lot of good information that way. Folks say, oh, Pinellas County is a good place, but if I could go to so-and-so, that's where I would really try to end up. And so we'll start collecting that today, the perceptional piece.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, ma'am.
Do you pick up some of the soft reasons, like I can do the same job from my home, and that's why I chose to go someplace else?
The question is, do we pick up some of the soft reasons for turnover? And the answer is yes. In these focus groups and in these sessions we have this week, folks will tell us that. They will tell us this employer allows telecommuting, or this employer has a flexible program, and if I needed to be home with my children or an older parent, I can do that because they have that flexibility. This week would really be the time period we'd be collecting a lot of that information from people. Yes, sir.
For thinking ahead to supervisors using the management assessment tool, the supervisor has, let's say, 12 different employees,
Okay.
all with the same classification. Are they going to get a consolidated view of what that looks like, or are they going to have to do 12 individual, basically every individual that fills one out, they have to do the management assessment tool?
Question is, if you have 12 reports and they all do the same job, when you review their JIT, do you have to can you fill out one that's consolidated, or would you fill out one for each person? And with the MIT, would you fill out one for each person? And that's probably not going to give you the answer you want. You would need to review all 12, or as many as you have. So there would literally be a link for each employee. You would click on that link. It would bring up their information, like on the tab or on the show, what I showed on the PowerPoint. And you would have to agree or disagree with each of those. On the management issues tool, so that's the JIT review. With the management issues tool, you can fill out one for all of them or 12 independently. That's totally up to you. So you could definitely have them consolidated on the MIT, but not on the review of the JIT. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, and I'm
Okay.
sorry, you probably covered this, but is there some sort of a report so that if you want to make sure you're being consistent, and let's say you're not able to do it all at the same time, that you can see either what you did in terms of response for each of the individuals, and or see each of the individuals and kind of handwrite things ahead of time, and then go in and do it.
Question is, and I didn't touch on that, so I'm glad you asked that. Thank you. The question is there a way that you can see what you've done and compare as you do them over time, especially if you have a lot of direct reports? And the system will display all of your direct reports on one screen. But what I'd recommend you do is that you print it. And so there is a print page or print form function throughout the tool. You can print the whole document if you want. I would encourage you to do that when you're doing the reviews for consistency's sake. We're going to encourage your employees to print a copy as well. just in case. And the system's pretty robust, and we use a third party that handles corporations much bigger than Evergreen. So that rarely does anything ever happen with the data, but we'll be telling them, print out a copy, keep a printed copy. And when you do the review, a lot of times that helps too.
And then, I'm sorry, one more
No problem.
question on this topic. Do you know which employee filled out each of those JITs?
The question is, do we know which employee filled out the JTs? And the answer is yes. They will have to identify themselves. So that unique token is unique only to them. And then when they go in, they'll see if it's their last name, and they'll have to confirm that's their last name. Now, there's nothing, as hopefully the PowerPoint demonstrates, there's nothing on the JT that would get them in trouble. And so we'll be telling them, don't worry about your name being on here. It's not an employee engagement survey or climate survey or satisfaction survey. There's nothing about your boss. You're not being asked to say anything about your boss. But sometimes employees are still a little bit timid about, that's my name. And we will tell them their name follows this data throughout the process. And so if someone says, well, that might change how I approach this, we tell them we understand, but their name will go along with all the data as they go through the process. Yes, ma'am.
How do you evaluate external comparables that may be in a similar state of flux with regard to conducting a paying class study and/or that may have just really outdated a paying class and maybe embarking on a study in the near future?
Well, the question is, how do we deal with other organizations that are peers that are in a state of flux? Either doing a study, might do a study in the future, might just really be behind. Every market we work in, every organization we work with, those are the conditions. And in a positive economy, like the one we have now, everyone's looking at doing something. Now, they may not be doing a study as comprehensive as Pinellas. And thinking of your peers, there's quite a few of your peers that are past clients of ours that would be familiar where they're at in that process. How we get around that, even if they are a current or past client, is we ask them what they did last year, what they're doing this year, what they're doing next year. And so we'll ask them if they're going to do something, what are they going to do, and roughly what it equates to percentage-wise. So we are able to factor that in. Does that mean that someone could be really far behind and pulling the market down? Yes, that does mean that. But we rarely have a small enough sample that that would have a major influence. So among your targets, we'll target anywhere from 15 to 25 other entities. If you have a few entities that are lagging, their influence on that whole sample is relatively small. If you have a few that are doing a study and they're part of the way finished with the study, we would ask them, where are you at with the study? Will the results be finished before we need to provide results to Pinellas County? And in many cases, you're just starting. If they are doing a study, they're ahead of you by a little bit. So they will be finished before your study's finished. We'd be able to look at what they did, even if they don't have that information ready when we're conducting your salary survey. But we will be mindful of that. That will be a set of questions that we ask about where they're at. And it's a fair question, excuse me. Some of them will be much more competitive than others, given where they're at in that cycle. But that would be information we'd want to bring to bear and share with you as we go through the process. Yes, sir.
So, you mentioned base pay as a target earlier. If a business unit has used overtime consistently for a period of time and/or mandatory standby, how do you factor that into the survey?
The question is, if a department has used overtime consistently and standby pay consistently over time, how do we build that into the survey? We will ask that HR provide us the overtime reports. So as long as that's something that's been consolidated with an HR, we'll have access to that. With base pay, we're concerned about the typical work week or the typical work hours that a person performs. With overtime, since it's federally controlled and the rules of the game are set at the federal level, we would look at if that's something you're utilizing to offset a lower level of base pay. And that will become evident if that be the case. So there's some organizations, many organizations, that in certain job families or specific occupations, they use overtime to make themselves more competitive. So everyone in my work unit or everyone receives additional pay in overtime. I keep the staffing low, so I'm able to do that intentionally because that helps offset the market differential. that will be something that's evident to us when we look at your base pay versus your peer-based pay. And having those overtime reports, we'll be able to look at, do you have an inordinate amount of overtime in certain work units versus others? Now, I want to clarify. Many times when we tell department directors that, or our senior managers, they say, oh, you're going to come back and tell us we're overusing overtime. And no, that's not our purpose. That would be a totally different type of study. That would be a staffing study that we'd be looking at. We'll just look at, are you in a position where your base pay is so low, you're having to use overtime to retain people? And we do see that in certain occupations in government. And so we will be mindful of that, and we will be looking at that as we go through. But you won't see us coming back saying increase or decrease your overtime hours. We'll be simply saying, is this impacting or not impacting based on base pay? Yes, sir.
There's two questions. One, if the supervisor will see the employee name.
Correct. The supervisor will see the employee name.
And then I have a key supervisor who's going to be out during the supervisor review period. Is there a chance they could do it a week later?
The question is, if a key supervisor's out during the supervisor review period, could they complete that a week after? And yes. What we'll do is be tracking supervisor review with HR as well. Typically, if we have some supervisors that are missing, we do leave it open for one more week for folks that might be on vacation or might not be able to complete it. So we'll communicate that as we get a little bit closer. Yes, sir.
If you have a classification that's like a programmer analyst in
Okay.
IT that's in an elected official office versus a board of county commissioners, similar titles, when you do your external equity study, do you go to that elected official or do you do in a general sense? How do you compare?
Very good
those two
question.
entities?
The question is, if you have an IT position that's in a constitutional officer's office, but as well as on the VOCC side, how do we set that up in the salary survey? And what we've done 90% of the time is we would survey, because if there's going to be a unified pay plan or unified approach, we would need to survey both. So we would need to survey your VOCC peers as part of that comparison. We'd need to survey the constitutionals in some of your peers also. And in an IT position, maybe some cities, maybe some even private sector would need to be included for that IT position to look at what that would need to be from an external equity standpoint. So we wouldn't limit unless this was specifically instructed of us. And recently we just completed a study that it was more instructed. It's another Florida county. Some of the constitutionals said, no, we just want to be compared to constitutionals. And so in that case, HR agreed to, we would limit their positions to other constitutionals. So I believe the supervisor of elections was concerned about that. I believe the clerk of the court was concerned about that, and the tax collector. And so for that county, for those three constitutionals, we just looked at other constitutionals. All the other constitutionals said, no, we want to be lumped in with whatever you collect for BOCC, and what we want, our office is included too. And so we have that flexibility, but typically where we start from and what we recommend is everyone goes in the same pot, and that we look at that broad cross-section.
So that was my follow-up, is based on your recommendation and your experience, it's better to have that unified approach than not.
From a data, yes, the question is it better to have a unified approach? From a data collection standpoint, yes. We would always rather have more data than less, because that helps us make more informed decisions or recommendations. Yes, sir.
So from your experience, do you recommend that the employees refer back to their written position description when they're completing the job assessment tool?
Question is, in our experience, do we recommend that employees look at the JD or the job description when they're completing the tool? And the answer is yes. That some of the phone calls we receive is, I don't really know how to put into words what I do, or I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing, or I want to make sure I'm saying something my supervisor recognizes. And so we'll tell them, review your job description. Don't copy and paste it in. Don't assume just because it's on the description that's what you do. But that's a good starting point to take a look at it. And if it's something they do that's not on there, that's great. That's a key part of this process. Definitely put it in your JIT. But if the vast majority is similar, then that's a good resource to start with. Absolutely. Good question.